We are on Deuteronomy chapter 1. Stan says this is broken like into 5 sermons. I guess we'll figure it out as we go. Something came up yesterday, like Moses, he spent 40 years in the Pharaoh's house. And then he spent 40 years, remember, after he murdered somebody, out in being a shepherd because he had to be in hiding. And then he came back and spent 40 years in the desert with the most dysfunctional church ever. So I think it's interesting that he's in all the 40s. And interesting too, I wish I would have started taking notes at the beginning of Genesis with Crazy Man, because he always explains the numbers. Remember I told you that I feel like the numbers always have some meaning. So like, he'll say number and then he'll say there's 5. That means this. Like there were 5 actions. That means this. So, I may have to go back and listen to the whole thing over again, but I do think that those things are important. He does have a playlist on Deuteronomy, by the way. I looked, but I just don't have enough time in the day. Okay. Kim, would you mind reading this morning? Once you unmute yourself.
I can do that.
Thank you.
I did have a question, though. I didn't ask it yesterday, but so after the 40 years of the Israelites wandered in the wilderness, now it's time to enter the promised land. But why is God now allowing the second generation to enter? Just simply because he promised? Like that was what he said and he held true to his word?
Yeah, I don't know that I have the correct answer. I like that first generation out of Egypt had been disobedient, grumblers, complainers, blah, blah, blah. So that second generation, because they were like, well, why didn't you just leave us in Egypt? At least there was food. Why didn't, even though God was providing them all these things? That second generation, was there 10 men? And then Caleb and Joshua were part of that went and looked at the land of Canaan, and they were the ones that came back and said, yeah, no, we can take it. They had faith. But even Moses was not allowed to enter.
Right. But we were, things just continued to be as corrupt as they always were. And I just thought, I wonder why he went ahead and allowed this second generation to enter that.
I don't know. Anybody else have thoughts on that? I mean, we may read more about that.
Yeah. Do you want me just to read chapter 1?
Yes.
Whole thing. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty long, actually.
Yeah. So there's a little introduction. What God has done for us. Moses's first address.
Do you guys think we should split this up into sections? I know Worsby sometimes it's hard. Does he do a break at like
pretty
8?
long? It's pretty long. It probably wouldn't be a bad idea to separate it out a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Where does Worsby break though? Does he break after 8? Can you see that?
He has let me look here. Looks like he has through 18 first. It says 1:6 through 18. I don't know what happened to 1 through 5.
Is it joined in somewhere else? Sometimes it does that too. Well, mine has a break at 18.
I don't see it.
Why don't we do that then, Kim? Let's do through 18 and stop.
Okay. So I'll start with the introduction.
Yeah.
God has led his people out of Egypt and across the great wilderness. Now they stand ready to enter the promised land. But before the Israelites go into the land, Moses has some important advice to give them. He delivers his advice in 3 parts. In the first part, Moses reviews the history of God's previous care for the people of Israel. Through God's actions in the past, we can learn about the God we serve today. chapter 1. This book records Moses' address to the people of Israel when they were camped in the valley of the Arabah in the wilderness of Moab, east of the Jordan River. Cities in the area included Saf, Paran, Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizahab. The speech was given on February 15th, 40 years after the people of Israel left Mount Horeb, though it takes only 11 days to travel by foot from Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea, going by way of Mount Seir.
So it took 11, it was actually 11-day travel and it took them 40 years.
Yeah.
They just went around in circles.
Oh my gosh. Were the
Do you
people
think
just,
anybody questioned that? Like, wait, this looks familiar.
right.
Yeah, like how did they keep going around in circles and not realize that that's crazy.
Or did they just go deja vu?
I know, I'm thinking, and they just did that. Like, well, wow.
They just grumbled all the time,
Yeah,
complained.
I think I would question that. If I
Sorry, I
knew
didn't mean to
better.
interrupt you. I just was like, really? It's only supposed to be an 11-day journey?
I know, I was thinking this, I was going to say something and you took the words right out of my mouth. Hold on 1 sec, I got to plug my phone in.
Yeah, another thought while she's doing that. So this morning with Crazy Guy, I learned that Moses married
Thank you.
Abraham's granddaughter on, okay, so he was married to Sarah first, and then when she passed, he got married again. Moses married the granddaughter to Abraham from that wife, the
Oh,
Mennonite.
wow.
Mm-hmm. Which I thought, well, that's an interesting connection.
That is interesting. Okay, so at the time of this address, King Sihon of the Amorites had already been defeated by Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan had been defeated at Ashtaroth near Edrei. Here then is Moses' address to Israel, stating all the laws God had commanded him to pass on to them. Leaders chosen from each tribe. It was 40 years ago at Mount Horeb that Jehovah our God told us, "You have stayed here long enough. Now go and occupy the hill country of the Amorites, the valley of the Arabah, and the Negeb, and all the land of Canaan and Lebanon, the entire area from the shores of the Mediterranean Sea to the Euphrates River. I am giving all of it to you. Go in and possess it, for it is the land of the Lord promised to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of their descendants. At that time, I told the people, I need help. You are a great burden for me to carry all by myself. But the Lord has multiplied you to become as many as the stars. May he multiply you 1,000 times more and bless you as he promised. But what can one man do to settle all your quarrels and problems? So choose some men from each tribe who are wise, experienced, and understanding, and I will appoint them as your leaders." They agreed to do this. I took the men we selected, some from every tribe, and appointed them as administrative assistants in charge of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens to decide their quarrels and assist them in every way. I instructed them to be perfectly fair at all times, even to foreigners. When giving your decisions, I told them, never favor a man because he is rich, to be fair to great and small alike. Don't fear their displeasure, for you are judging in the place of God. Bring me any cases too difficult for you, and I will handle them. And I gave them other instructions at that time also. I have another, my Bible goes through verse 25, and then there's another subtitle, the rebellion against God.
Yeah, my next section goes through 33. So yours must break in the middle.
The end of this subtitle, choosing leaders, ends after they send the spies in. Just right as they send the spies in.
Mine has that subsection like leaders appointed, and then after 18 it goes into Israel's refusal to enter the land. So let's go ahead and stop at the 18, and then that way, because I'm afraid we're not going to get read through all of it.
Okay.
But I was looking here and I was thinking, like, this is all applicable today because, you know, I love this here. This is what the courts should be doing. They should be hearing, you know, cases. We should judge between each other and not be impartial and treat people alike and not be intimidated. And then if we can't settle it between ourselves, then you go before, but we shouldn't have to, as Christians, go before a judge against another Christian. So that was interesting to me. Do you want me to read Tony first, Kathy, and then you can read Worsby, and then if we have time, I'll go get John, and I don't know if we'll have time or not. Okay, so first of all, my Bible says for Deuteronomy 1:1, look to the word. It says, in the Jewish tradition, the book of Deuteronomy is called words, De Barim, meaning the words of Moses to the people of God. Moses's goal in this book, I thought this was interesting too. He must have known that he was going to die and not go into the promised land, because he's reinstating to them, here's your instructions. You're getting ready to go in this new land. And I want to remind you of how this is supposed to happen. The fact that he was going through all this with them before they entered, I think is interesting. Moses' goal in this book was to restate and explain the law of God found in Exodus. Therefore, our English title of the book from the Greek is Deutros and Nomos, means second law, or the second accumulation of God's law for his people. In this book, Moses emphasized the covenant between God and Israel and the requirements that God placed on his people to ensure ongoing blessings. Do not overlook the importance of the covenantal requirements of keeping the law throughout the pages of Deuteronomy. The Old Testament reveals a secular pattern of Israel being unable to keep the law, falling into sin, needing to make continuous sacrificial offerings to atone for their failures, thus the need for Jesus, who kept the law perfectly and went to the cross as a perfect, unblemished sacrifice on our behalf. So I guess what he's saying is this is like a regurgitation of Exodus. Was to restate and explain the law of God found in Exodus. All right, Tony says 1-5. The spotlight in Deuteronomy landed on Moses, but not for his sake. He was speaking on the Lord's behalf as Israel's lawgiver and leader, the man through whom the Lord had liberated his people and revealed his covenant. When the people sinned against the Lord, Moses burned with righteous indignation and was zealous for God's holiness. See Exodus 32:17-20. When the Lord threatened Israel with destruction for their sin, Moses interceded for them. See Exodus 32:11-14. He had led the people of Israel for 40 years, never shrinking back from delivering God's messages to them. And here, as he faced the end of his life, the words of Moses spoke to all Israel were once again everything the Lord had commanded him to say to them. Moses began to explain God's law to the people. Why was this review necessary? One reason was the sad historical lead up to his message. Years before, the Israelites had received God's law, separated Mount Sinai, and arrived at Kadesh Barnea. From there, they were supposed to enter the promised land and conquer it. But it was now the 40th year since that day. At Kadesh Barnea, people had rebelled against the Lord and refused to enter the land. There you go, Kim. Did you hear it? At Kadesh Barnea, the people had rebelled against the Lord and refused to enter the land. Therefore, God had decreed that everyone from Moses' generation, those 20 years and older, would die in the wilderness for failing to trust him. There's your answer, Kim. So Deuteronomy opens with a new generation of Israelites standing at the edge of the promised land, this time at Moab. These children of the previous generation needed to hear afresh how Moses' generation had failed to obey God and what God expected of them as they prepared to lay hold of their inheritance as his people. Only by renewing their faithfulness to God and his covenant could they hope to conquer the land and live there in peace and prosperity.
So it wasn't even the original intention for them to wander for 40 years. That was
No, they
basically
refused.
not a punishment, but a lesson.
Yeah.
Till, yeah.
He says, yeah, so I guess we would read that. And I don't know that I ever picked that up before, but I guess in Exodus, he got them there and they refused to go in. And so then he was like, fine, wander in the desert for 40 years.
Right.
Where did you say that they refused to go into?
It is Kadesh, Kadesh hyphen barn, Barnea. He
And
says,
this was in Exodus that it says this.
yeah, received God's law, departed Mount Sinai, and arrived at Kadesh Barnea. And from there, they were supposed to enter the promised land and conquer it, which would have been Canaan. At Kadesh Barnea, the people rebelled against the Lord and refused to enter the land. So it didn't need to be this hard. They could have got new sandals.
Yeah,
Maybe
my footnote actually says the Israelites spent 40 years on a journey that should have lasted 11 days. It wasn't distance that stood between them and the promised land. It was the condition of their hearts.
Does it give any reference to Exodus? I'd like to know where that is.
I'm not seeing anything in my Bible where
No.
they're saying anything about Exodus.
How about, do you have a reference to Kadesh Barnea?
Well, I did further down. It says Moses, he was summarizing the nation's development. In Moses's mind, the nation of Israel began at the base of Mount Sinai, not in Egypt, for it was at Mount Sinai that God gave his covenant to the people, Exodus 19 and 20. Well, the thing of it is, so they wandered around for 40 years, supposedly learning, to obey. And that he was going to be the leader of their nation, but then they all died. So, the only hope was that they taught I guess the children grew up with all those laws, so they knew no differently.
Well, Moses would have been their leader for sure, so they would have learned. And now he's restating to them don't screw up like your ancestors did. This is what you need to do to live under blessing. Can you imagine if you were Moses, though, how frustrated you would be? Like you're leaving thinking this trip's going to take 11 days.
Well, what's interesting though is God thought the Israelites were prepared to enter the promised land when he released them from Egypt's, bondage. But I guess the final, that's where they were headed. So in 11 days, they demonstrated they weren't ready.
Yeah. In 40 years.
Ay, ay, ay.
Hey, here is I just found in my footnote in my Bible, it's saying verses 6 and 7. Let me find the beginning here. In Moses' mind, the nation of Israel began at the base of Mount Sinai, not in Egypt, for it was at Mount Sinai that God gave his covenant to the people. Now it's saying here, Exodus 19 and 20. So I don't know, huh?
Exodus 19 and 24.
Well, it's saying that's where God gave his covenant to the people, but I don't know. I don't know if it's somewhere around that in Exodus where it talks about them not going in.
Does someone have their phone available? They could Google it.
I have here 19, Exodus 19, Israel and Sinai. After escaping through the Red Sea, the Hebrews traveled through the wilderness and arrived at Sinai, God's holy mountain. There they received the 10 Commandments as well as instructions for building a tabernacle as a center of worship. Through Israel's experiences at Mount Sinai, we learn about the importance of obedience in our relationship with God. His laws help expose sin, and they give standards for righteous living. And then 19 verse 1, the Israelites arrived in the Sinai Peninsula 3 months after the night of their departure from Egypt.
So they are already too far gone.
After breaking camp at Rephidim, they came to the base of Sinai and set camp there.
Dash Barnea in the Bible.
Oh, there was a whole thing that happened at the mountain.
At the Mount Sinai with that golden, is that though, but that wasn't them refusing to enter, was it? That was them.
Well, it says they were supposed to prepare themselves for go down and now and see that the people are ready for my visit. They had 2 days to prepare for God's visit. And the day after tomorrow, I will come down upon my Mount Sinai and as all the people watch, set boundary lines the people may not pass and tell them, beware. Go up the mountain or even touch its boundaries. Whoever does shall die. Stay away from the mountain entirely. Moses went down to sanctify them, get ready for God's appearance 2 days from now.
I don't know if it talks about it in Exodus because all my Google searches keep coming back to Deuteronomy.
So the Lord came down upon the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses up to the mountain. But the Lord told Moses, go back down and warn the people not to cross the boundaries. They must not come up here to try to see God.
I'm finding references for Numbers too,
Yeah.
but I don't
Then
see anything about Exodus.
Moses said to go down and bring Aaron back with you, and don't let the priests of the people break across the boundaries, or I will punish them. When I punish people.
Yes, but mine keeps coming back to Deuteronomy and Numbers. So that's interesting. All right, well, I don't want to. Are we ready to move on to 6 through 8? Maybe we'll get more out of the different commentaries. As he reviewed the nation's history, Moses started at the right place. He said, the Lord our God, this God, the only true God, had redeemed Israel from Egypt's bondage, just as he had promised their ancestor Abraham in Genesis 15. He had chosen them for himself and entered into a covenant with them, a sacred agreement in which he would be their God and they would be his people. The Lord had delivered them, revealed himself to them, promised his faithfulness to them, and in response, they were to give their faithful obedience to him and him alone. When the Lord spoke to the Israelites at Horeb, which is another name for Mount Sinai, what do you guys have yours named?
Mine says Horeb.
Mine says Horeb.
So it's also Mount Sinai.
Can you spell Sinai?
Yep. Sinai. Where the 10 Commandments were given, he commanded them. It's also where Isaac was going to be sacrificed. He commanded them to leave and go to the land he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their future descendants. But notice that even though he had set the land before them, Israel still had to take possession of it. So they had a responsibility. This is an important principle for modern believers to embrace. Whatever God promises, he delivers, but laying hold of these promises still requires our obedience. There you go, Kim. We do not inherit the promises of God by sitting in our easy chairs. We love, work, pray, serve, and fight the good fight of faith because this is our kingdom role. We follow our King's agenda, trusting he will follow through with his blessings. Okay, and there's a short little section to get us to 18. Though Moses was a faithful leader, he couldn't do it all by himself. The people of Israel were too numerous for him to bear all their troubles, burdens, and disputes himself. So leaders, wise, understanding, and respected men were appointed for every tribe to help Moses. So he did set up like a court system. Each tribe had their own leader. And then if they couldn't handle it within the tribe, they came to him. That's interesting. Thus, every person in the community would have a place of appeal to obtain a hearing, with Moses ruling only on the difficult cases. See Exodus 18:13 through 27. Okay, that took me to verse 18, Kathy.
Hey, can I just say this? Following the Mount Sinai thing, when Aaron went back, the people were impatient, and that's when they did the calf, and like everybody, they built the golden calf and were worshiping it, and God got mad, and Moses went back up, and on their behalf, and he forgave them, and they were going to continue on to the promised land.
I think it's
And
interesting
then,
too, because I heard someone describing, like, when Moses went up and got the Ten Commandments, it was like they had just gotten married. God and the Israelites had just gotten married. He had just delivered them. And Moses walks away for a brief period of time. And in that short time that he's gone, they're committing adultery and worshiping
yeah,
half. I'm sorry, Kim. I felt like I cut you off there. I thought you were done.
no, it's true. It's just, well, just, it's not like suddenly, it was repeated disobedience and, you know, demonstration of their wickedness. And then, so he was just like, stopped it. It was like, you're not going in.
And before I start to read, I want to clarify something. This Kadesh Barnea, is
Yeah.
that the promised land?
Well, I think they came to Kadesh Barnea and the promised land was Canaan.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think they're the same thing. I think that's where
Okay.
they arrived and then refused to go in.
Okay. We start out with a little bit of a overview here of chapters 1 through 3, I guess. It says catching up on the past. Our journalism instructor taught us that the first paragraph of every news article had to inform the reader of who, what, where, when, and why of the event being reported. Deuteronomy 1:1-5 isn't a news article, but it does just that. People of Israel are at Kadesh Barnea in the 40th year after their deliverance from Egypt, and their leader Moses is about to expound God's law and prepare the new generation to enter Canaan. Although Moses himself wouldn't enter the land, he would explain to the people what they had to do to conquer the enemy, claim their promised inheritance, and live successfully in their new home to the glory of God.
Is Canaan spelled Canaan?
Yeah.
Okay.
God was giving his people a second chance, and Moses didn't want the new generation to fail as their fathers had failed before them. Israel should have entered Canaan 38 years before, but in their unbelief, they rebelled against God. The Lord condemned them to wander in the wilderness until the older generation had died, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb. And it has a reference to Numbers 13 and 14. Philosopher George Santayana wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And I got a
That ain't the
Okay.
truth. Remember COVID when it comes up again.
Yeah. Oh, that note there is just for the book that this George Santana wrote, I guess. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So the first thing Moses did in his farewell discourse was to review Israel's past and remind the new generation who they were and how they got there and how they got where they are. Knowing their past, the new generation in Israel could avoid repeating the sins of their fathers. Does that happen? Okay, Israel marching. This is verses 6-18. A grasp of history is important to every generation because it gives a sense of identity. If you know who you are and where you came from, you will have an easier time discovering what you should be doing. A generation without identity is like a person without a birth certificate, a name, an address, or family. If we don't know our historic roots, we may become like tumbleweeds that are blown here and there and never arrive at our destination. A father took his young son to the local museum to help him better understand what life was like before he was born. After looking rather glumly at some of the exhibits, the boy finally said, "Dad, let's go someplace where the people are real." Like that bored little boy, many people have the idea that the past is unreal and unimportant and has no bearing on life today. And like that little boy, they are wrong. The cynic claims that we all learn from history. The cynic claims that all we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. But the mature Christian believer knows that A.T. Pierson was right when he said history is his story. The Bible isn't a boring museum where everything's dead. It's a living drama that teaches us about God and encourages us to obey him and enjoy his blessings. No book is more contemporary than the Bible, and each new generation has to learn this important lesson. Then we're going to, it has verses 6 to 8. And along with that, it references Numbers 1:1 to 10:10. After the nation left Egypt, they marched to Mount Sinai, arriving on the 15th day of the third month. That's found in Exodus 19:1. And there the Lord, that's not what we were looking for, was it?
What is it?
Exodus 19:1. It says, after the nation left Egypt, they marched to Mount Sinai, arriving on the 15th day of the third month. And then it says Exodus 19:1.
19:1 says, oh, Exodus 19:1. Let me look.
Yeah.
Here. I'm in Numbers. Exodus 19:1. On the third moon, after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. On the third moon, after the people had gone out, on that day they set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. Then Israel encamped before the mountains while Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob. So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all the words that the Lord had commanded. All the people answered together, all that the Lord has spoken we shall do. But Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever. Doesn't sound like it.
Yeah. I thought maybe it would, but anyway, and there the Lord revealed himself in power and great glory. He delivered the law to Moses, who declared it to the people, and they accepted the terms of the covenant. The Jews left Sinai on the 20th day of the second month of the second year after the Exodus, which means they were at Sinai not quite a year. While the nation was camped at Sinai, the tabernacle was constructed, and the priests and Levites were set apart to serve the Lord. Why did the Lord have the Jews tarry so long at Sinai? He wanted to give them his law and teach them how to worship. The Lord didn't give Israel his law to save them from their sins, because by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. Under the old covenant, people were saved by faith, just as sinners are today. The law reveals the sinfulness of man and the holy character of God. It explained what God required of his people if they were to please him and enjoy his blessing. The civil law allowed Israel to have an orderly. The civil law allowed Israel to have an orderly and just society, and the religious laws enabled them to live as the people of God, set apart from the other nations to glorify his name. The law also prepared the way for the coming of Israel's Messiah, and the various tabernacle furnishings and ceremonies pointed to Jesus. Knowing that wars and dangers lay before them, many of the people might have been justified. Knowing that the wars and dangers lay before them, many of the people might have been satisfied to stay at Mount Sinai, but the Lord ordered them to move. Not only did the Lord command them, but he also encouraged them. See, I have given you this land. That's Deuteronomy 1:8. He promised to keep the covenant he made with the patriarchs to whom he had graciously promised the land of Canaan. And then there are references to a bunch of places in Genesis and then in Exodus. There's one. All the army of Israel had to do was follow God's orders, and the land would the Lord would give them victory over the enemies in Canaan. Okay, now Israel is on the way to Kadesh Barnea in verses 9 to 18. And there's also references to that for Numbers.
Say it again.
In 9 through 18, Israel's on the way to Kadesh Barnea, but it also has references to Numbers for that.
What is that reference in Numbers?
10, 11 through 12, 16.
10, 11. Oh, wow. Okay. 10, 11. In the second year, in the second month, on the 20th day of the month, the cloud lifted from the tabernacle of the testimony, and the people of Israel set out by stages from the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud settled in the wilderness of Paran. They set out for the first time at the command of the Lord by Moses. The standard of the camp of the people of Judah set out first by their companies. Over their company was Nahashon, the son of Amminadab, and over the company of the tribe, okay, blah, blah, blah. When the tabernacle was taken down, the sons of Gershon and the sons of Merari set out. Okay, it's talking about as they went out. Okay, I'm going to just keep going here. I'm just going to, talking about the different tribes. Moses' father-in-law. We are setting out for a place of which the Lord has said, I will give it to you. Come with us. We will do good to you. And the Lord has promised good to Israel. But he said, I will not go. I will depart to my own land and to my kindred. Please do not leave us, for you know where we should camp in the wilderness, and we shall serve as eyes for you. And if you do go with us, whatever good the Lord will do to us, the same will do to. Okay, so the people complain in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes, and the Lord heard it. His anger kindled. And the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. And the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So the name of that place, it was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord had burned among them. Now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and the people of Israel also wept again and said, oh, that we had meat to eat. And we remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna. Look at it. To look at. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like that of whatever that is. The people went about and gathered it and ground it in hand mills. Oh, I didn't realize it was like seed. That's interesting. I just always thought this white fluffy stuff. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like that of whatever this is, bdellium. The people went out and gathered it and then ground it in hand mills or beat it in mortars and boiled it in pots and made cakes of it. And it tastes like the taste of it was like the taste of cakes baked with oil. And when the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell with it. It was probably really high in omega-3. They wouldn't have needed meat. I'll bet you, like a chia, or flax. If it was like the oily bread in Leviticus. Anyway, that's my thought. Moses heard the people weeping through their clans, everyone at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord blazed hotly, and Moses was displeased. And Moses said to the Lord, why have you dealt ill with your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing child to the land that you swore to give to your fathers? Where am I to get meat to give all these people? For they weep before me. Give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to carry all these people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once, if I find favor in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness. That's when they go on to appoint the elders. So each tribe, group of people had an elder. Churches have elders. Then they do the quail. He sends the quail. And then 12 is, where does it go to in 12?
16.
Miriam and Aaron opposed Moses. So Miriam and Aaron opposed Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he married. For he had married a Cushite woman, and they said, has the Lord indeed spoken through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. And now the man Moses was very meek, more than all people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, come out here, you three, to the tent of meeting. And the three of them came out, and the Lord came down in a pillar of a cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And he said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house, and with him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, not in riddles, and he holds the form of the Lord. Oh, he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord kindled against them, and he departed. When the cloud removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous like snow. And Aaron turned to Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, oh, my Lord, do not punish us, because we have done foolishly and have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes out of his mother's womb. And Moses cried out to the Lord, oh God, please heal her, please. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut outside the camp 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again. So Miriam was shut outside the camp 7 days, and the people did not set out on the march until Miriam was brought in again. After that, the people set out from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. I don't think that answers our question, but it was a pretty good story. I don't know that I remembered all those details.
Yeah. This might sound crazy, but I just always thought when it said the Lord provided them with manna, that was just already ready to eat.
I know, me too. That's what I was saying. I didn't realize
I thought it just dropped from the sky and they ate it.
Yeah, it was white fluffy stuff.
Yeah.
But it was seed.
And they had to fix it.
Yeah. And the fact that it had oil, the fact that it was like the oily bread tells me that it had to have like some omegas or things like that in it.
Yeah.
So it probably had everything they needed in it.
Mm-hmm.
We were all confused, weren't we, on that one?
Yes.
Yeah, we pictured like something like an oyster cracker is what I thought.
Yeah.
I always thought it
Or
looked
those
like snowflakes.
the little itty bitty crackers they serve at communion sometimes.
Yeah.
And you know, the quail is a really oily bird too.
That's a good point, because it would be dark meat, wouldn't it?
Then
Mhm.
it would be
I would think, yeah.
interesting to know the nutritional benefits of manna and quail.
Well,
That's
and
all
the
they needed.
interesting thing too, like once you start reading, God did not offer the meat. Moses told the people he would provide the meat, and God honored his telling the people that.
Yeah, thinking about it, I kind of thought, man, God, he's that's harsh. Like we're afraid to discipline our children harshly, but woo, but having said that, he tolerated a lot
Yeah.
before, you know.
How
I
much
don't
more do you
know.
have, Kathy?
It's about 2 paragraphs.
Okay, go ahead, because it's 10:30. So we'll go ahead and finish here and do John tomorrow.
Okay, it wasn't easy for Moses to lead this great nation because he frequently had to solve new problems and listen to new complaints. Accustomed to the comfort of their camp at Sinai, the people resented the hardships of their journey to the promised land. They forgot the distress of their years of slavery in Egypt and even wanted to turn around and go back. They got accustomed to the manna that God sent them from heaven each morning and soon took it for granted, and they longed for the savory meat and vegetables they had enjoyed eating in Egypt. No wonder Moses got discouraged and cried out to the Lord. He wanted to quit, and he even asked God to take his life. Give me 1 second here.
Well, that's what I was reading about, how frustrated he was.
It says this is the first time the title, the Lord your God, is used in Deuteronomy.
What verse was that?
Verse
there-
10.
And the Lord is all capital, so that'd be Yahweh.
And you'll find it used almost 300 times in the book. Moses used it to remind the Jews that they belonged to the Lord and were his special people. Okay.
How many times? 300?
It's almost 300 times in this book. Yeah. God's answer to Moses' prayer was to give him 70 elders to assist him in managing the affairs of the camp. Moses was a great leader and a spiritual giant, but even he could only do so much. He and the elders organized the nation by thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, with competent leaders in charge of each division. This created a chain of command between Moses and the people so that he didn't have to get involved in every minor dispute. He could devote himself to talking with the Lord and helping to settle the most important problems in the camp. The charge Moses gave to the newly appointed leaders is one that ought to be heeded by everybody who serves in a place of authority, whether religious or civil. Emphasis is on character and justice, and the realization that God is the judge and the final authority. If all officials made their decisions on basis of nationality, race, social position, or wealth, they would sin against God and pervert justice. Throughout the law of Moses, there's an emphasis on justice and showing kindness and fairness to the poor, especially widows, orphans, and the aliens in the land. And there are references to Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy there. Frequently, the prophets thundered against the wealthy landowners because they were abusing the poor and the helpless in the land. He who opposes the poor reproaches his maker. The end.
I think that church structure should follow this too. You know, like we do have elders, but as the church grows, you can only handle so many people. Stan says that's why like most churches are like 75 people, because 75 people is all one pastor can handle. And so when the mentality of the church was, well, everything was the pastor's job, and the pastor did everything, that's why that church would stay small, because the pastor can't do anything. He can only handle so much. And I think a lot of pastors' families ended up falling apart because he was pulled in so many directions that he couldn't even take care of his own family. So then you ended up with a bitter pastor's wife. You know what I mean? Like when you see like a pastor's wife that seems bitter or disconnected. I really think that's why.
I can see that very much. Yeah.
With those many people, Moses wouldn't even be allowed to sleep.
No,
There'd
6
always be
million?
there would always be somebody poking at him. They had to set it up like this.
Yeah. And I also pointing out that it says wise, understanding, and experienced men. Like, what is this society doing to our men right now? They are emasculating them and saying that you can be a woman, you don't have to do anything. We women can do all the things. We don't need a man. I mean, it's very satanic. Totally the opposite of what God, and I don't know, I was watching something Candace Owens posted this morning, and she goes, who, like, what woman thought this was smart? What woman said, I don't need you. I'll work and I'll take care of the house and I'll take care of the children and I'll present my body on the internet and have a nipple-free day. She goes, yeah, this sounds like an awful position for men to be in. Although I gotta say, some of them have earned.
I said, no, thanks.
Yeah, no, me either. I remember when I first went back to work, I said either because I had been home for a little while and I took care of everything, which I didn't mind that because I was home. But then when I went back to work, they still expected that. And I was like, either you want a stay-at-home mom and wife, or you want someone who's working. And if you want someone who's working, then you all are gonna have to pitch in and help. Or it's not gonna happen. So
That is true. And I think that's sometimes where a lot of resentment for women come in. Because I know my first marriage, that's what it was. I had to work, but I had to do everything.
Yep.
Everything. He'd come home and sit on the chair. That was
he
it.
was a man, and the Bible said, you serve the man. You be the
Yeah.
Proverbs 31 woman. Not recognizing his own part in it. Anyway, society. Change it one person at a time, I guess. Any other thoughts, input?
Well, we're people that never learn from history either, do we? Some do, but
That's like when we tell our kids, you don't have to learn the hard way. You can take my advice and learn what I learned from the hard way, and you can have it the easy way. But I remember I said that to Brett one time, and he said, I guess I just have to learn the hard way. And I said, okay.
Yeah, it's like I've already been around that mountain. I have advice for you. Make it a little bit easier if you just listen. All right, well, this will conclude today's study for today. Tomorrow we will pick back up. We'll do John MacArthur, and then we'll move on to the next section, verse 19. Have a good
Well,
day, ladies.
Mhm.
I
Bye.
Bye.